Their country as South Korea marks its 70th Armed Forces Day. The remains of 64 South Korean soldiers killed during the Korean War have been returned to their homeland, and a ceremony is due to start in a few minutes, and we'll be bringing that to you shortly. Before I introduce you to our guests today, first some background. These remains were excavated in North Korea under the joint project carried out by the United States and the North between 1996 and 2005. It was confirmed the remains, which were sent to the U.S. Defense POW MIA accounting agency in Hawaii, are of South Korean soldiers who died during the 1950 to 1953 conflict. Now, the remains were arrived at Seoul Air Base on Sunday and had an escort of fighter jets to pay respects to the fallen heroes. The repatriation ceremony itself, though, is going to happen outside the National Assembly in Seoul in a few minutes' time. So with that, let's bring in our guests. I have with me today our Defense Ministry correspondent, Park Ji-won. Thank you for joining us, Ji-won.
Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Kim Chang-soo from the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis. Thank you as well, Dr. Kim, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. And Dr. Kim, I'd like to start with you. We are about to pass over to the National Assembly, but as a military expert yourself, someone who has a genuine affection for the armed forces, what are your feelings about what we're about to see?
Because there are reports already this time, even though it's going to 70th anniversary, which means really a lot to many South Koreans, they are going to intentionally reduce the level of the military parade, for example, because compared to 5 years ago, because this parade is held every 5 years, because there are many concerns that this might cause traffic jams in the main streets, and also they don't want to irritate too much to the North Koreans because we are in a very kind of peace mood. So this is very intentionally at a very proper level, and one of the aims for this parade and party is a kind of party for soldiers, because these young generation Koreans pretty much want to be entertained. So there's a lot of differences I can tell in 5 years.
Right, absolutely. And going over to our Park Ji-won here, Ji-won, I touched upon it in the opening a little bit, but it took about 10 years of close analysis, didn't it? The US POW MIA accounting agency, they learned that they had around 70 sets of remains that were of Asian descent. And after the South Korean recovery team's examination, then 64 of them arrived back in South Korea on Sunday. Just wondering if you could just walk us through how they distinguish the remains between the North Koreans and the South Koreans and even Americans.
Okay, according to South Korean Defense Ministries, we also do have our own agency, which is called MAKRI. MAKRI means Ministry of National Defense Agency for KIA, which is Killed in Action, Recovery and Identification. And one of the senior officials from there told defense correspondents said that there are clear 4 criteria to distinguish whether those are from the US or North Korea or South Korea. And they said there are 4 criteria, which are, and those criteria were jointly agreed upon with the US back in 2016.
Okay, we are receiving video now from the Songnam Air Base, Seoul Air Base, a military airport used, and you are looking at President Moonjae-in with some military officials and also veterans of the war. We are watching the repatriation ceremony on what is a beautiful autumn day here in Seoul, so the weather really did help us today. Dr. Kim, as we wait for the ceremony to start, okay, let's pass it over to the ceremony.
First, we will unload the remains of the fallen soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise from where you are.
오늘 봉헌되는 6.25 참전 국군 전사자
The remains of the four fallen heroes are returning home today, and I will now explain the excavation and identification process. From 1996 to 2005, the U.S. and North Korea jointly carried out excavation projects near Changjin Lake of South Pyongan Province and Gujangeup and Unsan County of North Pyongan Province, North Korea. After it's been confirmed that the remains included those of Asians, South Korea and the U.S. also carried out joint identification process for 3 times in 2011, 2015, and 2018. As a result, remains of the 28 fallen heroes, who are considered to be Korean soldiers, have been returned beginning from 2012. 5 of them have been identified and thus returned to their beloved families. And beginning in August this year, additional identification process was carried out for 3 weeks, which confirmed that the remains belong to 64 South Korean soldiers. Therefore, the Republic of Korea is paying tribute to the fallen heroes who have sacrificed their lives to defend the security and liberal democracy of their homeland during the Korean War and are returning in 68 years. Vice Defense Minister flew all the way to Hawaii to aboard the remains on an Air Force transport aircraft, which was escorted by F-15K and FA-50 fighter jets to the Seoul Air Base. And going forward, the Ministry of National Defense will further identify the remains of the return and to return them to their beloved families. Now all of the remains have been unloaded and been laid in state. We'll now carry out the Pledge of Allegiance. First, allegiance to the flag. Please face the flag in front of you.
이어서 국군 전사자께 대한
Next,
경례가
salute to
있겠습니다.
the fallen soldiers.
전사자께 대하여 받들어 총! 세워 총!
다음은 헌화 및
Next,
분향이
floral
있겠습니다.
tribute and silent
먼저
tribute.
대통령님과
First, President,
참전용사 대표
representative of war
5분께서
veterans,
헌화 및 분향하시겠습니다.
will come up to the stage for floral tribute.
대통령께서 대표로 분향하시겠습니다.
The President will burn the incense.
이어서 국방부 장관, 연합사령관,
Next,
각군
the
총장,
military
각 종파별
high-level
군종표구장
officials
등
will be paying
단상
floral
우측
tribute
부대님께서
and incense burning,
합동으로
along
헌화하시겠습니다.
with the distinguished guests who have been joining us today.
다음은 국방위원장 및 국방위원,
And next,
보훈처장,
the chairman of the National Assembly's National Defense Committee and leaders of the veteran organizations will jointly give the floral tribute.
다음은 대통령께서
Next,
고국의
President
품으로
will
돌아온
award
국군
the
전사자
Korean War
한 분
Medal
한 분 모두께
and pay silent
6.25
tribute to
참전기장
each
수여 및
and every one of the fallen
묵념을
heroes who have now returned to their homeland.
그곳에서 울지 마오 나 거기 없어 그 자리에 잠들지 않았다오 그곳에서 슬퍼마오 나 거기 없어 그 자리에 잠든 게 아니라오 나는 전에 바람이 되어 찬란히 빛나는 눈빛 되어 곡식 연그는 햇빛 되어 하늘한 가을비 되어 그대 아침 고요히 깨나면 새가 되어 날아올라 밤이 되면 저 하늘 별빛 되어 부드럽게 빛난다오 그곳에서 울지 마오 나 거기 없어 이 세상을 떠난 게 아니라오 잠들지 않아 다오 그곳에서 슬퍼 마오 나 거기 없어 이 세상을 떠난 게 아니라오 나 거기 없어 이 세상을 떠난 게 아니라
네 분께서는 자리에서 일어서 주시기
Please
바랍니다.
rise from where you are.
국군 전사자께 대한 조총 및
Next,
묵념을
rifle volley
올리겠습니다.
salute to the fallen soldiers.
일동 묵념.
Silent tribute.
바로
At ease.
유해 봉송을 위하여 운구병이
Now soldiers will
입장하겠습니다.
now enter to help carry the remains of the fallen soldiers.
앞으로 가!
국군 전사자 유해를
The
공송
remains of the
차량으로
fallen heroes will be
모시겠습니다.
transported via a special vehicle.
So we're back here in the studio. We'll keep watching the video for you for 64 families as yet unidentified. The long and agonizing wait will soon be over. We are watching a solemn ceremony. One by one, the baskets of the remains were carefully unloaded from that military plane. The remains were saluted and paid the highest degree of respect. President Moonjae-in, the Defense Minister, the Chiefs of Staff from the Army, Navy and Air Force are there, and US Forces Korea Commander General Vincent Brooks, as well as dozens of Korean War veterans. We saw President Moonjae-in paying individual respect and prayer to each and every one of them as well. We are still here with Dr. Kim Chang-soo from the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses and our Defense Ministry correspondent Park Ji-won. Dr. Kim, while we're watching this unfold, while we were watching the ceremony, you mentioned the symbolic importance of this ceremony coming at this time and at this location. Could you just expand on that?
If you look at the Common Declaration and Korean Declaration, there are points that the two Koreas, North and South, agreed to send its war remains as soon as possible. So this is one very important, visible implementation of the document.
Sorry. I think there was a problem with the microphone there, Dr. Kim. I think the mic slipped off you. So I will continue looking at this footage as we reconnect you. And apologies for that technical issue there. But I want to go back to you there, Dr. Kim, because you did make a really interesting point about the significance of this ceremony happening right now when the two Koreas have improved their relations to such a great degree. Just fill us in more about what you were saying while we were watching that solemn part of the ceremony.
First of all, this ceremony is being held at Seoul Air Force, which is the airport that President Moon and his entourage returned from Samjin Airport a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things most striking to many South Koreans, and particularly to the United States as well, is repatriation of the war remains. And that was the one point that both in North and South Korea agreed during the Panmunjom Declaration and also Pyongyang Declaration. Because this is very high symbolic, just Mr. President did for the American war heroes in the United States. Highly symbolic, but this is also quite different from all the previous national, Armed Forces Day ceremony, because quite often we had a big military parade, army parade, but this time we intentionally chose this Air Force Air Base in Seongnam because this, I think it's a connecting point between North and South Korea in terms of the past and the future and the present. So why this ceremony is important to many Koreans, because who will be dedicating their lives to the national service. So they really deserve to be rewarded like this. And one of the slogans I noticed in the pictures are, "We are going to remember you in the name of the Republic." This is a very important meeting, and I'm sure this will pave the way that we are going to really meet all these points in the agreements, two agreements. That is how we are ready to carry out each and every points we made and the two important documents.
Yeah, you touch on some good points there, Dr. Kim. It offers some psychological relief not only to the families of those who have relatives who are missing from the Korean War, but to the nation as a whole, because men are required to serve in the military in South Korea. So it's closure, perhaps for some of the families once they identify these remains, but also a reassurance that the country truly cares for the tens of thousands of active duty military currently serving in South Korea. As we watch President Moonjae-in greet and shake hands with Korean War veterans and other officials there at the ceremony, I want to bring in our Park Ji-won once again. Ji-won, while this is going on, this is of course a wonderful moment for the country, but the next process is going to be like putting together an extremely difficult jigsaw puzzle. But the two Koreas have agreed to run this kind of pilot project to speed up the process, hopefully jointly recover war remains within the military demarcation line and the demilitarized zone. Tell us more about when that is going to start and what area is it going to cover exactly?
That's right, Mark. Well, that's part of the recently signed comprehensive inter-Korean military agreement during the recent summit between the two defense ministers of two Koreas, that they agreed to retrieve war remains within the area of DMZ. That's where the South Korea's defense ministry estimates about 10,000 South Korean troops and about 2,000 U.S. forces are believed to be killed inside the region, but since that's inaccessible, we couldn't really retrieve any remains, and two Koreas have never worked together on joint recovery project. So this project will start next April, but before doing that, we need to remove landmines inside the area, because we know that the number of landmines, the different sorts of mines are so many. So for starting today for until the end of November, they will focus on removing landmines inside the DMZ. And when that's all done, they will make a 12-meter wide, a 12-meter road inside the DMZ to facilitate those progress of joint efforts to recover the remains. And when it's all done, they will make a team of comprising about like 80 to 100 from each side to start the joint recovery operation program as a pilot program starting next April next year to October next year.
Yeah, and Dr. Kim, while we were having a conversation, you touched upon the mine detecting technology that is available these days to both of the Koreas. It's not a case anymore where you have to go centimeter by centimeter with some tool checking under the soil. It's a lot more advanced these days.
Yes, we still do the manual checking and exploding, but most of all it will be done by machines, because we had this almost 11 years ago. We had the same experience because we are about to open railways and roads with North Korea. We imported some very highly sophisticated mine removing machines from Scandinavian countries. They are very proven effective. So they're going to first use all these machines, we still have them, and they run all the way along the 12-meter width of road, and then it will be followed by personnel, because the man should be the final decision makers, and they're very experienced soldiers, and they're going to have their own the machines, and then it will be demining all the anti-personnel mines, because there are anti-tank mines and also anti-personnel mines. So you have to, most of them are anti-personnel mines. So we will need the machinery and also the personnel who are experienced to do this job. And some people talking about even the use of the drones from the above, because that way you can save a lot of people damaging. Not many people will be damaged by going inch by inch and finding all these mines on the ground.
Well, we have been just watching the ceremony, the repatriation ceremony for 64 South Korean soldiers killed during the Korean War. They are now back in their homeland. We saw President Moonjae-in pay the nation's highest degree of respect to those extremely brave men who paid the ultimate sacrifice to defend South Korea so we can enjoy the democracy we have in this country today and the freedoms, of course. So our heartfelt thanks goes out to them. Dr. Kim, I just wanted to ask you another question, because we are going to be on air for a few more moments. The financial cost of excavating remains quite expensive as far as I know. Can you tell us, do you know a rough idea of how much it costs? Because as we know, a lot of these battles during the Korean War were fought in what are now very remote, mountainous areas, and getting equipment up to those areas is difficult. Is it an issue where North Korea and South Korea are going to need help with choppers and diggers and such like?
In my opinion, because we don't have any very concrete numbers and time, because it'll take, we don't know. But the joint team, both North and South Korea, will decide how long and will be the best location for demining all these mines. So it'll be done by our joint team, North and South Korea, and before we actually run into these demining operations next April. We have no idea, but maybe some estimates, it'll not cost that much money. because compared to all the sacrifices, compared to all the pay we the nation, as a nation, pay to these fallen heroes, and it compares, it's a very small thing, I think. It's not the money, or it's not the time, but this really should be, they really deserve all this kind of very high respect by the people, by the nation as a whole.
Just quickly, Dr. Kim, and then I'll turn back to our Park Ji-won. You mentioned that those aren't necessarily caskets so much, and it might not be the case that there are actually bone fragments in some of those. It might just be the case that we say they are remains, but they might not actually be a part of their body.
That's
it
right.
could even just be a part of clothing or a shoe or something like that, correct?
That's right. Sometimes you see big caskets in the United States, flag draped casket, but this case, you see some baskets, small boxes, because it's not the human body or human skeleton as you might imagine. This may be anything that can be identified or fully accountable for the people who fell. So any clothing, as you mentioned, like any clothing, any IDs, that will be helping to identify and fully account all these. Because identification is one thing, but full accounting, as we call it, is very important. It needs tremendous technology. Only the United States has such high technology. So we share, United States and South Korea share that kind of high technology. And that's why we send visitor like DPAA, or used to be called the SIHA in Hawaii, where we can learn some of the technologies and all the techniques involved. So we share this kind of information between the United States and South Korea. And it's not the money, but I agree it's a higher symbolism and the reward we should pay to these, war heroes.
Well, as you mentioned, it's astounding that they can extract DNA from even a boot or something like that, thanks to the technology we have today. The United States, as Dr. Kim mentioned there, generously provide that to South Korea for that process. We are watching pictures that we saw just a moment ago. President Moonjae-in paying his respects there at Seoul Air Base, which is where he returned to just about a week ago following his trip to North Korea. So the symbolism of that is there for people to see as well. Turning back to our Park Ji-won then, Ji-won, now we must mention that South Korea does have its own agency that is in charge of finding the remains of South Korean troops killed during the Korean War. It's called MACRI, I believe, and it's focused on bringing them back, finding them and identifying them, full accounting, as Dr. Kim said. Ji-won, I believe you actually went to one of these locations, so if you can just tell us about the recovery work that's going on in South Korea, because we must remember there are still a great many undiscovered remains on South Korean territory. Tell us more about the efforts that are ongoing here in South Korea.
Yes, the retrieving the war remains have started back in 2000 here in South Korea as a project that at that time it was a temporary project to mark the 50th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. And since there was a very success, in 2007, the MACRI, or the Ministry of National Defense Agency for KIA, Killed in Action Recovery and Identification, was formally established. And since their efforts, they've discovered about 10,000 sets of remains, and 123 have been identified thanks to their identification tag or personal seals or those personal belongings. But I have to correct what we have just discussed. I guess the 64 sets of remains are actually, they must include, if no matter how small it is, parts of bones, because they went through all these process.
Okay.
That's according to some briefings at the Defense Ministry with those related officials. And since I went there, Mark, in July, it was, that was one of the hardest thing that I ever did as a reporter, because to get into the deep mountain, that's actually the civilians cannot get access because that's very close to the demarcation line. So we had to go through all these identification process. And when we went there, I was surprised at how many that they've been doing the recovery work for the past 6 years in that area alone. And they're still finding parts of very little bones. And so these troops are educated to distinguish like branches and bones, but when such a long period of time passes, human bones look like a branch. So they need to really find whether it's the humans or animal bones or like just tree branches.
So what you're saying, it's an extremely painstaking process.
Right.
So it's going to take many more years. Not only to keep finding the remains, but then the full accounting, as Dr. Kim mentioned, that's so important for the families of these missing soldiers. You can't really fathom the suffering they've had to endure all these years, and hopefully 64 families will soon have a degree of closure, because for them the Korean War hasn't really ended, even all these decades later. But going back to Dr. Kim, as we watch the replay of the ceremony there, these remains represent just a fraction of those believed to still be in North Korea. This is a wonderful day for the country, having these brave men back on home soil. But we mustn't forget the tens of thousands of South Korean troops who were killed during the war, who remain unaccounted for. Do we have a clear estimate of how many South Korean servicemen are still missing north of the border, Dr. Kim?
Something like 7,000, American soldiers, 7,000 American soldiers still missing, killed in action. But one thing we forgot to remember, we're going to start an excavation operation at the arrowhead point in the DMZ area. So this is an area designated by the Ministry of National Defense that we are going to begin excavating this particular point, because there was a very difficult position as America. Many people should have been involved and many killed in that particular point. So that's the one area that we're going to start operating as soon as possible. But there will be a lot of other points, because there were very heavy fighting during the war and many casualties quite involved. So that's quite naturally we're going to see all the people, military historians as a matter of fact, where would be the most possible location for these kind of war remains. And so it'll take many months and years, but we have accumulated all the data available to us so far, because we actually began all this kind of operation a long time back. So we're going to restart, but before that we're going to have a kind of joint meeting with the North Korean counterparts. So from the data, what are the most probable locations for this kind of MIW and KIAs? So in that way, we are going to probably pave the way for much quicker, much facilitated way of identifying and recovering all these remains during the Korean War.
And according to an estimate by the MACRI, the remains of some 120,000 South Korean, and as Dr. Kim mentioned, 7,000 or 8,000 U.S. soldiers who died during the Korean War haven't been recovered. But we are not sure whether they are in South Korea or North Korea, because they haven't been recovered yet.
Yes, and 70 years or so of spring, summer, autumn and winters have gone by, and the bone fragments can be tiny many times as well, and are spread out over vast areas. It's pretty much like finding a needle in a haystack, considering all the years of erosion and construction that goes on. We never know how many buildings have been built on top of where a great many brave servicemen unfortunately perished. Going back to you, Dr. Kim, as we look at these recorded pictures from earlier this morning of the 64 South Korean soldiers' remains returning to their homeland, very emotional scenes. How encouraged are you, Dr. Kim, by North Korea recently handing over the US soldiers' remains? Do you think this really provides the ongoing momentum for really positive change between North Korea and the US?
This is very positive, very highly symbolic, because people want to see and touch and feel it. Otherwise, all the very abstract concepts are just out of their touch. So this is a very immediate way, in a kind of good optics, I would say, that North Korea and the South Korea are really willing to exchange all these war remains, and also with the United States. That way we can really pave for the normal relations between the countries, United States, North Korea, and North and South Koreas. So that's why we started this repatriation ceremony this morning at Seoul Air Base. Two are very highly symbolic. And these are just a huge, optics, and this just conveys tremendous meaning to the just watchers, because you have to understand the past history and how we fought along DMZ, and all the military historians will come out to assist you with all the information. What would be the most probable occasion for these war remains? And it will also involve many technicians and scientists as well, because we shared and exchanged information with the United States from the DPAA and SILHI. And we have trained many soldiers to identify and fully account all these remains. So this is a sign that we are improving our relations, both diplomatically and militarily, and also scientifically, I should say. So this is a good start, very highly profile. But we're going to move into much more harder topics, meaning finally to the denuclearization of the North Korea and the Korean Peninsula as a whole.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We've heard many times as well that US President Donald Trump is very excited and delighted to hear that North Korea is cooperating so well on the return of US remains. We are watching the return of the South Korean remains, so hopefully this can be the period of a lot of families getting some closure after all of these decades, not knowing exactly what happened to their sons, brothers and fathers. But Jiwon, we are running out of time slightly now, but just I wanted to ask you on a personal level, watching the scenes we saw this morning as a Korean citizen, someone who works very closely at the Defense Ministry, what kind of feelings does this evoke in you?
It really felt like a period of reconciliation between the two Koreas. Especially President Moon himself is a children of a North Korean parents who got to South Korea during a very famous like a Hungnam evacuation project, and that was very close to one of those like Battle of Changjin, where actually many of those remains came from. So it feels like that. Wow! After decades of this, very hostility that seemed like there's an ending, it seems like now we are really entering a period of reconciliation between two countries.
Well, let's hope so. Park Ji-won, Defense Ministry correspondent for Arirang News, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you. And Dr. Kim Chang-soo from the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis. We really appreciate you coming on the show today as well on what is a very solemn but also happy and kind of triumphant moment in many ways. That's where we're going to wrap up our coverage of the return of those 64 South Korean war remains from the United States via North Korea, home at last after several decades, so they can be laid to rest on the soil of the homeland they fought so bravely to defend. To those of you watching us who have served in the South Korean military, or those who still are, on behalf of everyone enjoying the freedoms and democracy we have in South Korea these days, we thank you very much for your service on this 70th Armed Forces Day. And that's where we're going to leave this portion of the show, but let's continue our news coverage now with the rest of the day's stories. So today marks the 70th anniversary of South Korea's Armed Forces Day, commemorating each soldier's sacrifice and service. The main event of the day is actually going to take place at the War Memorial of Korea in Seoul this evening. Now, unlike some of the previous ceremonies, this year's Armed Forces Day will not include large military parades. Instead, South Korean military's future combat systems, such as the Army's Warrior platform and drone bots, will be on display, taking place at night. For the first time, the event will also feature some K-pop performances by some famous artists you've probably heard of, including Mr. Gangnam Style himself, Psy. And starting today, as we touched upon earlier, South and North Korea will start removing mines from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, and from the Joint Security Area, the JSA, in Panmunjom. This is all part of implementing the military agreement signed at the Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang. Both sides will be removing the mines through October 20th. Now, during the process, officials from the South, the North, and the UN Command will discuss new operational rules for soldiers working in the JSA after it's demilitarized. They'll also discuss the possibility of tourists and visitors being allowed to visit both sides, including the northern side of the JSA. South Korea is seeking to register its areas near the DMZ to be part of the UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves, an intergovernmental initiative to promote environmental sustainability. It hopes this can open the road for joint environmental protection projects with North Korea. Kim Hyo-sun with the details.
South Korea has registered 5 counties in Gangwon-do province located along the inter-Korean border and Yeoncheon-gun county of Gyeonggi-do province as UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves. They include Cheolwon, Hwacheon, Yanggu, Inje, and Goseong counties, encompassing an area of over 180,000 hectares. The whole of Yeoncheon-gun County, excluding the DMZ, which spans over 58,000 hectares, has also been registered. While the 5 Gangwon-do province counties registered for the initiative in 2012, such a move lacked support from local residents. South Korea's resort island of Jeju is also seeking to have the entire island registered as Biosphere Reserve, expanding from the currently designated area of Hallasan Mountain and its surrounding areas. Taking this opportunity, South Korea's Ministry of Environment hopes to carry out environment preservation projects jointly with North Korea. A total of 686 sites across 122 countries have been registered as UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now, the South Korean Navy will continue to discuss with Japan over the flying of a controversial imperialistic flag on a Japanese vessel that's due to take part in an international naval event in waters around Jeju Island this month. Seoul's foreign ministry also says it has communicated with Tokyo over the issue. It explained Japan needs to proactively consider the public sentiment Koreans have over that flag there, the Rising Sun flag, which is viewed as an emblem of Japan's wartime aggression and imperialism. Seoul's request has so far been rejected by Japan based on the reasoning that ships for the country's maritime self-defense force are required by law to fly the flag. The death toll from an earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia has soared to more than 800, with authorities fearing the number could rise even further. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Arirang. So Arirang, what's the latest?
Well, Mark, the latest death toll given by Indonesia's disaster agency stood at least 832. However, there are many still unaccounted for, and the country's vice president estimates the final death toll could reach the thousands. Rescuers are continuing to dig through debris with their bare hands in the city of Palu on Sulawesi Island, which was hit by waves as high as 6 meters following a 7.5 magnitude earthquake last Friday. There is a desperate need for heavy equipment to reach possible survivors buried underneath collapsed buildings, including an 8-story hotel where voices were heard in the rubble. Indonesian President Joko Widodo said more heavy machinery was on its way. Most of the confirmed deaths were from Palu, but officials are bracing for the toll to climb as connections with outlying areas are restored. Of particular concern is Donggala, a region of 300,000 people north of Palu and close to the epicenter of the quake, as well as 2 other districts which have been cut off from communications since Friday. Meanwhile, the South Korean government is working with Jakarta to track down a South Korean national who went missing in the wake of the disasters. The South Korean embassy in Indonesia is also working to verify the identities and whereabouts of several other people reported to be Korean nationals. Meanwhile, millions of people in Japan have been ordered to evacuate as Typhoon Trami makes landfall there. Over 80 injuries have been reported so far, with hundreds of flights and train services being cancelled or suspended. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Typhoon Trami is slashing Japan with heavy rain and strong winds, causing power outages and forcing evacuations from areas still recovering from recent typhoons. Osaka's Kansai International Airport, which was flooded by a typhoon last month, has shut its runways. Airlines have canceled more than 1,200 flights, and most local trains and bullet trains in central and western areas suspended operations on Sunday. Evacuation orders and advisories were issued for millions of households nationwide, as more than 37,000 households in and around Tokyo were without power. A woman in her 60s had been reported missing in Miyazaki Prefecture after she was washed away in a paddy irrigation channel, with more than 80 people reported injured as well. Japan's weather agency has issued warnings of landslides and flooding from possible storm surges. Typhoon Trami was near Nagoya as of 10 p.m. Sunday night, and forecasters expect it to move past Tokyo by early Monday. In September, Typhoon Jebi, the most powerful storm to hit Japan in 25 years, brought some of the highest tides since 1961, flooding Kansai International Airport, taking it out of service for days. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, Chinese President Xi Jinping has stressed efforts to strengthen training and war preparedness of his country's military. His comments last week came as he was inspecting the 79th Group Army of the People's Liberation Army in China's Liaoning province. During the visit, Xi got hands-on with the equipment, boarding a Z-10 military helicopter that was developed and manufactured independently by China. The inspection also came ahead of China's 69th National Day, which falls on Monday, that is today. Cristiano Ronaldo has denied as fake news accusations of rape made by an American woman. In an Instagram video, the Juventus and Portuguese footballer said people wanted to be famous by using his name, adding it was just all part of the job. Catherine Mayorga told Germany's Der Spiegel magazine that Ronaldo raped her in a hotel room in Las Vegas back in 2009. She reportedly reached an out-of-court agreement with the footballer to not go public with the alleged rape for a payment of $375,000 US. Her lawyers are now seeking to declare the non-disclosure agreement void. Meanwhile, Ronaldo's lawyers said they will sue the magazine to seek compensation for what they called moral damages.
Well, thank you to our Aram for the world news there. Now back here in South Korea, the National Assembly resumes its interpellation session today, with rival party lawmakers questioning top government ministers on issues related to foreign affairs and security. Now, many of the questions are likely to focus on the parliamentary ratification of the joint declaration reached between the two Koreas at the Panmunjom summit in April. The ruling party wants to ratify the agreement as soon as possible to ensure that the promises can be smoothly implemented, while the Conservative opposition says progress on denuclearisation must come first. The parliamentary Q&A session initially kicked off in September, but 3 of the 4 sessions were postponed as they overlap with the Inter-Korean summit in Pyongyang and the opening of the Joint Liaison Office. South Korea's trade surplus with the US shrank this year due to a surge in US imports. A report by the US Census Bureau released on Sunday shows the South Korea's trade surplus with the US was down 24% during the January to July period compared to the same period last year, amounting to $9.9 billion US dollars. In particular, South Korea's US imports related to the energy industry rose amid higher international oil prices and an increase in liquefied natural gas generators. America's trade deficit with South Korea shrank by more than 24% on year to $3.2 billion. South Korea's main gateway, Incheon International Airport, is working to do away with passports for boarding and use eye scanners instead. Now, the system could be ready for international flights as soon as 2020. Incheon International Airport Corporation says it's using an iris scanning system for employees at its headquarters on a test basis. It also has a system that can verify a passenger's fingerprints without the need to touch anything. An official with the airport said they're working with the relevant authorities, such as the Immigration Agency, on how to move ahead. South Korean golfer Yoo So-yeon has won the JLPGA Japan Women's Open Golf Championship. She did so over the weekend, scooping her first professional title in Japan. The world number 4 finished strongly in the 4th round with a 5 under 67 for a 4-day total of 15 under par, 3 strokes ahead of the runner-up. It's the 28-year-old's 4th national title since she went professional. Yoo won the China Women's Open in 2009, the US Women's Open in 2011, and the Canadian Women's Open in 2014. Now, in some tech news, seed banks help maintain biodiversity and preserve plants for the future. And here in Korea, there's now a seed bank for seafood. Park Se-young with more.
This glass bottle is filled with pink jelly-like pellets which look like frogs' eggs. They're the seeds of a new type of seaweed. These water tanks are home to giant abalones. The shell of each abalone has something that looks like a piece of chewed gum. It's actually a chip containing the abalone's information, like where it's from and how it's being taken care of. This research institute's primary goal is to collect the seeds of Korea's marine species and store them in order to preserve the different species. The Bank of Abalone secured the seeds of 6 species over 6 years, while the Bank of Seaweeds secured the seeds of 11 species over 8 years. The researchers are also working on developing new species by selecting good characteristics from each species.
Through crossbreeding or selective breeding of preserved genetic resources, we're trying to create a new species that can adapt to climate change.
Because bringing back extinct species is difficult, the banks will continue to work on seed preservation. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Now, for some health tips, really. If you're eating corn, you generally don't eat the silks or the husks, as they don't taste very good at all. But it turns out that corn silk has some seriously good health benefits that can help men with prostate problems. And now Korean researchers are working on using them in health supplements. Jo Sung-min reports.
Numerous studies have proven that corn silk is beneficial to our bodies. The shiny thread-like fibers that grow as part of ears of corn are rich in an antioxidant called masin, which was found to help reduce blood cholesterol levels and heal vascular conditions, among other health benefits. Now, thanks to a research recently conducted by local researchers at the Rural Development Administration, corn silk has been found to also help prevent prostate enlargement, a condition known as BPH. BPH is the most commonly occurring prostate problem among men in their 50s and older. It does not develop into cancer, but it occurs when prostate cells multiply in a way that adds additional pressure on the urethra. The process forces out fluid more frequently, leading to frequent trips to the bathroom and, in worst cases, urinary incontinence. Researchers say lab rats with enlarged prostates showed a considerable improvement in their condition after they were administered corn silk extract for 6 weeks. The test also revealed the rats not only had lesser number of prostate cells, but also gained properties that prevent BPH.
We believe corn silk could represent a new resource for new products that could generate more sales in the agricultural sector.
Researchers are carrying out various tests on corn silk to discover more health benefits it might have and are hoping to develop supplements that can be exported in the near future. 조성민, Arirang News.
I hope you dressed accordingly. The first day of October kicked off on a very chilly note. In fact, many upper regions had the chilliest morning temperatures of this season today. And morning drizzle in some of the central regions should get cleared, while other regions will see pleasant autumn sky throughout the day today. But daily highs will not rise much. Seoul will see highs in the teens. Chuncheon will only make it to 18 degrees Celsius this afternoon, while the rest of the country will see highs getting up to the low 20s, topping out at 21 degrees in Gyeongju, Daegu, and over in Gwangju. The morning chill continues into Tuesday, but temperatures will rebound to above seasonal averages by the midweek. And overall, the first week of October is looking promising with big gaps in temperature readings. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to Arirang TV. And a reminder that our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.